Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Vox podcast.
And welcome. Today we're doing a really fascinating deep dive, shifting gears a bit to look at a literary titan. Someone whose shadow just falls so long across modern storytelling.
Absolutely. Today, our focus centers on one of the most, truly significant figures in world literature, Charles John Havisham Dickens. We're going to be sifting through sources that cover his, let's just say, his tempestuous life. We'll dissect his remarkable and profoundly influential literary style. And most importantly, we're taking an extensive, really granular look into one of his most beloved works, the powerful novel of ambition and class, Great Expectations.
And our mission for this deep dive is very concentrated. We want to extract those crucial insights that explain why. Why does Dickens remain so globally read and influential today, almost 2 centuries after he started writing?
Right.
We're going to pay particular attention to how the unique and frankly shameful hardships of his own early life didn't just inspire his fiction. They actively fueled his powerful, burning critiques of Victorian society.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? The man who became what perhaps the world's first true literary superstar had a foundation built on financial collapse and poverty.
Complete collapse.
To understand his books, we have to start by understanding that trauma. So what were those formative years actually like for Charles Dickens?
Well, Charles Dickens, who sometimes wrote under the playful pseudonym Boz, was born on February 7, 1812 in Lamport near Portsmouth.
Yeah.
He died relatively young, actually, June 9, 1870, at his country estate, Gad's Hill Place.
And his reputation?
From a purely statistical standpoint, he is one of the most important authors in world literature. Multiple critical rankings consistently place his major works, David Copperfield, Bleak House, Great Expectations, among the most significant British novels ever written.
But this fame came despite, not because of, his family background. His parentage sounds highly illustrative of the unstable middle-class life he so often depicted.
It was incredibly unstable. It was characterized by this constant scramble for a status they just couldn't afford. His father, John Dickens, was a clerk in the Navy Pay Office, and Charles was the second of 8 children.
8 children.
8. And the family's defining characteristic was, mobility and just terrible financial management. They moved constantly from Lamport to London, then to Chatham, back to London by 1822, and everywhere they went, they lived consistently, dangerously beyond their means. John Dickens, he's charming, but so irresponsible, an inveterate borrower.
And in early 19th century England, debt wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a physical danger. It could get your entire family imprisoned.
It was catastrophic. And it led to the central, the trauma-inducing experience of Dickens' childhood, which happened in 1824.
Okay.
John, his father, was finally cornered by his creditors and forced into London's notorious debt prison, the Marshalsea.
The Marshalsea.
And in a really grim practice of the time, his mother and 7 of the children, they just moved into the prison with him. It provided this twisted sort of stability, but its ability defined by incarceration.
But young Charles, he was only 12. He was thrust out of this family unit and forced to survive alone outside the prison walls. That sudden severance must have been an enormous shock.
It fundamentally altered his worldview. It instilled in him this deep, searing sense of shame and abandonment that, honestly, he never truly overcame.
I can't imagine.
Imagine being a 12-year-old boy, suddenly cut off from school, forced to work in this grubby warehouse, pasting labels on bottles in a shoe polish factory near the Thames.
Horrifying.
He saw himself as utterly degraded. He'd fallen from the perceived status of a respectable family to a common laborer, the absolute lowest rung of society in his eyes.
And the sources note he could no longer attend school regularly during this time, which would just compound that sense of lost opportunity.
Absolutely. The experience of this period, the sheer monotony, the dirt, the psychological weight of being the sole tiny breadwinner for a family trapped in Marshalsea, that directly fueled some of the most moving and most clearly autobiographical passages in his fiction.
Especially in David Copperfield.
Especially. Dickens himself later wrote that the thought of this degradation haunted him for years, and it informed every single word of his social critique.
So his career trajectory only changed after his father's release later that year, but his rise after that point was remarkably fast.
He was astonishingly quick. It really proves the sharpness of his intellect. After his father's release in 1824, he went back to school, but only briefly, until 1826.
And then?
By 1827, instead of more formal education, he starts working as a clerk for a lawyer. Now, this position was crucial. He didn't just file papers, he used the time to intensely study the human types he encountered in the legal world.
The pompous, the desperate.
The sly. Exactly. This keen observation was the foundation of his character work.
And he quickly found his true calling in journalism, becoming famous for mastering stenography.
By 1829, he transitioned to a parliamentary stenographer, reporting on these complex, fast-paced debates in the House of Commons. He mastered Thomas Gurney's system of shorthand, becoming so proficient that he remains its most famous user to this day.
That's an incredible skill. The speed, the synthesis.
Invaluable skills that he immediately applied to his literary career. He wasn't working in obscure papers either.
No, he was on the front lines of Victorian media.
By 1831, he was working for the True Sun, and soon after, the Morning Chronicle. His journalistic grounding gave him that observational sharpness, that urgency, and the speed he needed to capture the rhythms of London life.
And his literary fame. That was cemented incredibly quickly in the mid-1830s through a totally new publishing model.
His fame was, to use your earlier word, explosive. In 1836 and 1837, the Pickwick Papers began appearing in monthly, serialized installments.
Ah, the serial.
This format was revolutionary. It made the stories accessible to a much broader public who couldn't afford a full, expensive hardback novel. It turned reading into this communal monthly event.
So everyone was talking about it.
Everyone. This serialization immediately cemented his fame, and he began writing multiple novels simultaneously just to meet the public's insatiable demand.
Before we dig deeper into his style, we do need to address his complex and eventually scandalous personal life, specifically his relationships.
Right. His early romantic life was marked by disappointment, which maybe foreshadowed the complications to come. He was involved with a woman named Maria Beadnell in 1830, but her family, they viewed him as too low status.
And rejected his proposal.
Flatly rejected it. They eventually sent her abroad. And this rejection likely echoed some of his deep-seated insecurities about class.
He then married Catherine Hogarth, and they had a huge family, but that marriage eventually unraveled in a very public way.
He married Catherine in 1836, and they went on to have 10 children together. But by 1857, his life took a seismic turn. He met a young actress, Ellen Ternan. Their relationship, which was kept largely secret, lasted until his death. The separation from Catherine in 1858 was unavoidable, but a formal divorce was strictly unthinkable for a man of his public standing in Victorian times. It would have been the professional ruin.
So the compromise was a kind of domestic separation managed by family.
Yes, exactly. Following the separation, Catherine moved out, and his sister-in-law, Georgina Hogarth, who was very loyal to Charles, she stepped in. She managed his household and cared for the children until his death. It was a messy public situation that contrasted sharply with the domestic morality he so often preached in his works.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a man whose life is a dramatic contradiction. Childhood shame and financial ruin, followed by global fame and massive wealth. How did this stark tension between the street and the drawing room define his writing style and, crucially, his mission as a writer?
That tension was the creative dynamo. Dickens' narrative mission was intensely moral. It was purposeful. He sought literary success, of course. That was his financial driver. But he saw it as his duty to awaken the conscience of his time.
He wanted to change things.
His goal was to pave the way for tangible social reforms by exposing the grotesque inequalities he had experienced. The shame of that shoe polish factory gave him this unassailable moral authority to critique the very system that had nearly destroyed him.
And that passionate, sometimes furious moral drive manifests in what we now recognize as the distinct Dickensian atmosphere. It's instantly recognizable.
It is. This atmosphere is defined by a highly detailed sharpness of view, often rendered with vivid, dark imagery, the fog, the decay, the mud. But it's always brilliantly paired with humor, usually derived from the eccentricities of the common man. His primary source was the rich, resilient, often popular life of the lower classes, whose nuances he knew intimately.
Let's talk about his most enduring legacy, his characters. They are monumental, almost mythical figures in English literature.
They're more than just characters, they're archetypes. I mean, think of the sheer variety. Ebenezer Scrooge, the pathetic Tiny Tim, the terrifying Fagin, the haunting Miss Havisham, or the earnest Pip.
And the names. He had a genius for naming.
A peculiar genius. Yeah. One of his distinct quirks was using these fantasy names that hint at their appearance, their moral disposition, their role in the plot.
Can you give an example of that naming quirk in action?
Certainly. I mean, beyond the obvious Tiny Tim, he often used these exaggerated, almost satirical names that sounded slightly absurd just to ensure the character stuck in your mind. The source mentions a satirical one, the name Noble Refrigerator, which was clearly a dig at the cold, formal snobbery of the British aristocracy.
Noble refrigerator, that's perfect.
It instantly communicates the character's lack of warmth.
And this incredible gallery of human figures wasn't entirely fictional. Many of them had real-life inspirations.
They did. His observational skills meant he constantly mined reality for inspiration. For instance, the character Harold Skimpole in Bleak House, the cheerful, childlike spendthrift. That was based on the writer James Henry Lee Hunt.
And the most famous one?
Perhaps most famously, Mr. Micawber, the eternally hopeful, perpetually insolvent optimist in David Copperfield. That was a thinly veiled, though maybe affectionate, satirical portrayal of his own father, John Dickens.
This sharp observation and character work weren't just for entertainment. They were the vehicles for his fierce social critique. What specific Victorian institutions did Dickens attack most directly?
He launched direct, highly effective assaults on some of the most entrenched and inhumane institutions. And critically, these critiques often led directly to policy changes, showing the unique power of fiction to reshape law.
Let's start with the plight of the poor, which he knew so well.
In Oliver Twist, published in 1838, Dickens specifically attacked the New Poor Law of 1834. This law was based on the premise that poverty was a moral failing. So it was designed to make life in the workhouses so miserable, so dreadful, that people would choose starvation over accepting charity. Dickens just skewered this Malthusian philosophy by vividly detailing the starvation, the cruelty, the crime that resulted from the system.
And it worked.
His unflinching depiction of London's slums, like Jacob's Island, contributed directly to public outrage. It fueled successful parliamentary debates that led to changes in the structure of relief after the book's release.
That's remarkable, a novel changing the law. He also famously targeted the bureaucracy and injustice of the legal system. He knew that from his time as a clerk.
Oh, he absolutely did. In Bleak House, he launched this monumental attack on the interminable delays, the labyrinthine procedures, the sheer cost of the Court of Chancery.
Embodied by the case of Jarndyce and Jarndyce.
Exactly. A fictional inheritance dispute that drags on for decades, consuming generations of claimants, enriching only the lawyers, and leaving the estate itself worthless because of court fees.
He showed how the system was functionally corrupt.
Through sheer inertia. Not even through malicious intent, just through its own weight. And he didn't stop there. He targeted government inefficiency itself. In Little Dorrit, he focused on the Circumlocution Office, a bureaucratic nightmare that was a thinly veiled satire of the Patent Office.
Where all new ideas went to die.
Exactly. He showed how these entrenched, lazy structures were actively preventing social and technological progress.
Beyond institutions, his critique was aimed at the deep-seated prejudice of the Victorian class system.
This is perhaps his most enduring moral achievement. He challenged ingrained prejudices by showcasing the inherent dignity or the tragic circumstances of characters typically dismissed by polite society. The character of Nancy in Oliver Twist, the prostitute trapped by her loyalty to Sykes.
A powerful example.
He presents her as a tragic figure capable of immense courage and humanity, aiming to chip away at the firm, unforgiving social judgments of the day.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He wasn't just an author, he was an international celebrity. He actively controlled his public image, engaged with his audience globally, almost like a 19th century brand manager.
Exactly. His works achieved massive success, especially across the Atlantic and North America. This fame allowed him to take on these exhausting but highly profitable reading tours, like the one he did in the U.S. and Canada in 1842.
He was a phenomenon.
Truly. The crowds that came to hear him read his own work were enormous, cementing his status as a global literary star.
But this immense fame led to one of his first great public controversies, the fight over copyright.
He sparked a major wave of indignation in the U.S. when he demanded international copyright protection. American newspapers, notorious for their piracy, were printing his stories immediately upon publication.
Without asking permission.
Or paying him a cent in royalties. Dickens, a savvy and business-minded author, rightly resented this theft.
So he arrived expecting adulation and instead found himself fighting a legal battle, which seems to have seriously soured his view of America.
It did. He left the country deeply disillusioned. He had expected this tolerant, open Republican society.
An opposition to the English aristocracy.
Right. Instead, he found pervasive social hierarchy, what he called class distinctions and class thinking, and of course the deeply disturbing reality of slavery. His travelogue, American Notes, really reflects this profound disappointment.
Interesting. And on a separate note, there's a mention of his fascination with mesmerism.
Yes, on a separate but intriguing note, during his trips to Italy in the 1840s and 50s, he was an enthusiastic follower and even a practitioner of mesmerism.
A precursor to hypnotism.
Right. Based on this idea of a magnetic fluid that could be manipulated to heal or influence people, it just shows his deep, lifelong interest in psychology, the subconscious, the hidden workings of the mind, a fascination he often channeled into the psychological complexity of his later novels.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this podcast.
So, moving from the author's life to his literary zenith, let's now turn our attention to Great Expectations, which was published in serial form between 1860 and 1861.
This novel is universally considered a hallmark of his mature work. It showcases a depth that maybe surpassed his earlier, more sprawling efforts.
That's right. It represents a remarkable maturation of his style. It's a profound fusion of genres. It uses clear, potent elements of the Gothic novel, the decaying sawdust house being the perfect example. But fundamentally, it functions as a Bildungsroman,
A novel of maturation.
a novel of self-discovery, similar to David Copperfield. It tracks the painful psychological development of the protagonist, Pip, from a naive, guilty child to an arrogant young man, and finally, to a chastened adult.
And what central theme does this novel dissect with such precision?
The primary thematic focus is a merciless, brutal scrutiny of the gentleman ideal prevalent in Victorian society. This ideal was, as Dickens shows, often rooted in vapid materialism, snobbery, and profound moral hypocrisy.
And he brings a new psychological sensitivity to it.
An acute psychological sensitivity that makes Pip's internal journey so compelling.
There's a crucial detail about the ending of Great Expectations that shows Dickens wrestling with the novel's thematic core right up to the final draft. It reflects his complex view on redemption.
This is one of the most famous literary interventions in history. John Forster, Dickens' biographer and close friend, reported that Dickens originally intended a conclusion filled with resignation and profound disillusionment.
So Pip and Estella were meant to part for good.
Permanently. He only granted the novel a somewhat less harsh, ambiguous ending, the one we all know today, upon the explicit advice of his friend, the influential writer Edward Bulwer Lytton.
So the story really demanded a more somber fate.
Dickens instinctively felt so, given Pip's moral failures. And stylistically, the novel is considered remarkably forward-looking. The narrative technique, with its differentiated levels of mood, psychological association, the intense atmosphere, the fog, the marsh decay, is often cited by critics as directly anticipating the psychological focus and narrative complexity of modernism.
Let's break down the plot. We begin with the orphan, Philip Pirrip.
Philip Pirrip, or Pip, a full orphan living in the bleak, foggy marshland near the Thames estuary. He's raised in very modest circumstances by his older sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, a hard, abusive woman, and her kind, simple, loyal husband, Joe Gargery, the village blacksmith.
A simple, moral life.
Deeply moral, though Pip is too young and ambitious to realize it yet.
His life of humble toil is suddenly interrupted by a terrifying, fate-altering encounter in a graveyard.
This is the novel's genesis moment. Pip encounters a fierce, terrifying escaped convict, Abel Magwitch. Magwitch is broken, desperate, wearing the iron ankle chains of a prisoner.
And Pip helps him.
Driven by fear and pity, he reluctantly agrees to provide the convict with a file to cut his chains and some food. A stolen pork pie, minced meat, cheese, bread, some brandy. That single act of simple, spontaneous charity is the engine of the entire plot.
And his attempt to secretly aid Magwitch is quickly followed by the convict's capture, but not before Magwitch protects the boy.
That protection is crucial. A troop of soldiers arrives. Joe, the blacksmith, is called upon to fix their broken handcuffs. When Magwitch is captured, he sees Pip and, in an act of deep gratitude, falsely confesses to stealing the food and brandy.
To protect Pip.
Exactly. He claims it was out of terrible hunger. Pip, knowing the truth of his own theft, feels like an utter deceiver towards Joe, compounding his fear and sense of secret guilt.
This is Pip at his lowest social status. Then, the unexpected invitation arrives, pulling him toward a completely different world.
Joe's uncle, the pompous Uncle Pumblechook, delivers this bizarre invitation for Pip to visit the rich, reclusive, and eccentric Miss Havisham. The reason given is simply for Pip to play.
But for Pip, it's a summons into high society.
A terrifying summons. Now we enter Satis House, which translates ironically to enough house, but which is anything but satisfying. The house is decaying, moth-eaten, lifeless, filled with yellowed, withered objects.
And Miss Havisham herself is at the center of this decay.
perpetually frozen in time, wearing a never-used yellowed wedding gown. She clutches her chest and tells Pip, "My heart, it is broken by men and women. Now I need entertainment. Play, my boy."
And Pip meets Estella, the beautiful but devastating instrument of Miss Havisham's calculated revenge.
Estella is immediately established as beautiful, proud, and deliberately hurtful. She cruelly criticizes Pip's rough hands and bad boots, which causes him profound humiliation and plants the seed of his lifelong ambition to become a gentleman.
And this cruelty is exactly what delights Miss Havisham.
Precisely. She wants to see men suffer the way she did.
The emotional signals Pip receives are psychologically torturous, designed to draw him in with hope, only to crush him immediately after.
They're purely manipulative. Estella later offers him a kiss on the cheek, saying, "You may kiss me, Pip." A tiny gesture of false hope. But immediately after this, we get the strange incident in the pub. A mysterious stranger shows Pip a filed-off leg iron and gives him a shilling wrapped in two-pound notes.
Which just reinforces his fear that his criminal past is linked to any future wealth.
Inextricably linked. That terrifying secret pushes him away from his home. Pip begins his apprenticeship with Joe, but he's already morally distant. He's ashamed of the coarseness of his home and desperately yearns to escape the forge and enter Estella's world.
Then comes the shocking violence that permanently fractures his life there. The attack on Mrs. Joe.
This is a turning point. It merges Pip's emotional guilt with real-world crime. Mrs. Joe is severely injured by a blow from a blunt object. Crucially, the weapon found underneath her is a filed-apart leg iron.
So Pip immediately suspects a link to his convict past.
He does. His suspicions fall on Orlick, Joe's disgruntled employee or the strange man from the pleb. This crime sets the stage for the arrival of the formidable figure who will reshape Pip's destiny, Mr. Jaggers.
The powerful London lawyer.
Introduced with his characteristic large head, suspicious look, and that strange, unsettling habit of biting his finger. He informs the stunned Joe that Pip is to be freed from his apprenticeship. He's going to inherit a considerable fortune.
And must go to London.
To be raised as a gentleman under Jaggers' guardianship, retain the name Pip, and most importantly promise never to seek to know the identity of his secret benefactor.
For Pip, this is the ultimate validation. He's convinced Miss Havisham is his secret savior.
Utterly convinced. He moves to London, settling at Barnard's Inn with Herbert Pocket, the son of a relative Miss Havisham had mentioned.
And living with Herbert finally allows Pip to piece together Miss Havisham's full, tragic backstory.
Herbert acts as the novel's internal biographer. He explains she inherited a large fortune, but her disinherited half-brother may have been involved in her ruin. She fell in love with a handsome, manipulative man who gained her trust and wealth. On their wedding day, he abandoned her.
And Estella, the beautiful tormentor, was an active part of this vengeance.
Herbert explains that Estella was adopted as a small child, and Miss Havisham deliberately encouraged her in these moods to take revenge on men. Estella is a weapon, forged by Miss Havisham's bitterness and rage.
While Pip is trying to navigate this new society, he encounters his academic rivals and, more painfully, the social divide he's created with Joe.
He meets Bentley Drummle, described as sluggish, lazy, proud, and clumsy, who immediately becomes his romantic rival for Estella. And it's a key detail that Mr. Jaggers shows this keen, almost perverse, interest in Drummle's brutish character.
And then comes the devastating moment when Pip's transformation into a snob is laid bare, Joe's visit to London.
This is the emotional low point of Pip's moral journey. Joe visits his newly refined London apartment, and Pip is acutely, shamefully embarrassed by Joe's common manners, the way he eats, the way he addresses Pip as "Sir." Joe delivers the simple message that Estella has returned from abroad, but Pip just realizes how deeply he has betrayed the man who loved him most.
On his subsequent journey back to see Estella, the mystery of his criminal past gets a terrifying, definitive confirmation.
As Pip travels back, he encounters a convict on the coach. The convict reveals he was sent by my convict pal to give a young boy 2-pound notes as thanks for food.
So it's confirmed.
This definitively confirms the link between the shilling, Magwitch, and the original crime. Pip realizes, with sick certainty, that his entire fortune, his expectations, have been funded by the lowest criminal stratum of society.
Estella's return only increases his romantic torment.
She's now an elegant, beautiful woman, but she treats Pip like a casual acquaintance, constantly reiterating the painful truth. You must understand that I lack a heart to share your feelings. Yet Miss Havisham watches, desperate for Pip to suffer, shouting, I know that you love her, Pip. Love her, love her, love her.
The moment of ultimate unmasking, when Pip is 23, is the novel's central dramatic revelation. It destroys everything he believed.
On a tempestuous, wet, cold night, Abel Magwitch, now using the alias Provis, the original convict, appears in Pip's apartment. He reveals, shattering all of Pip's romantic assumptions, that he is the secret benefactor.
Not Miss Havisham.
Miss Havisham. Magwitch made a vast fortune in Australian South Wales and dedicated his life to making Pip a gentleman, purely out of gratitude for that one act of kindness on the marsh.
And this revelation instantly turns Pip's immense wealth into an immense danger.
Yes, Magwitch is a lifetime transportee. His return to England is a capital offense, subject to the death penalty. Secrecy is paramount. Pip is horrified. His romanticized expectations are vaporized, replaced by nothing but disgust and revulsion.
He still has that snobbery in him.
Deeply entrenched, he feels profound contempt for this coarse, criminal source of his wealth.
Jaggers confirms the unbelievable story, but Pip makes a swift decision about the criminal fortune.
Jaggers verifies everything. Pip, morally shocked, refuses to take any more of Magwitch's money. But recognizing the immense danger, he agrees, based on Herbert's clever suggestion, to help Magwitch escape the country.
As the escape plan takes shape, Magwitch recounts his past, and we realize the depth of the criminal entanglement connecting Pip's life to Miss Havisham's tragedy.
Magwitch details his life as a struggling day laborer and thief. He was hired and controlled by a well-dressed gentleman named Compayson, who used him for criminal activities, particularly forgery.
And the class bias in the courtroom was blatant.
Compayson, looking the part of a gentleman, received only 7 years for a crime Magwitch instigated. Magwitch got 14. And he confirms Compayson was the second convict Pip saw years ago.
So, Compayson, the man who ruined Magwitch, is the very same man who ruined Miss Havisham.
That's the stunning connection Dickens creates. It reinforces his thematic point that crime and high society are far closer than Victorian morals would admit. Herbert confirms that Compayson was Miss Havisham's deceitful fiancé. This single shared villain links Magwitch's criminal past directly to Miss Havisham's romantic tragedy.
This moral awakening prompts Pip to take action to repair the damage he's inadvertently caused.
He approaches Miss Havisham, who is by now racked with guilt. Pip successfully convinces her to fund Herbert's business prospects with £900. As he speaks, Miss Havisham collapses, weeping, crying, "Forgive me, what have I done?"
The moment of the fire, where she literally becomes engulfed by her own bitterness, is one of the most powerful symbols in the book.
It is intensely symbolic. Later, her wedding dress catches fire at the fireplace, a physical manifestation of the self-consuming rage she has harbored for decades. Pip extinguishes the flames, severely burning his own hands. These literal scars mark the painful physical reality of his moral transformation. He has finally acted selflessly.
And the final piece of the puzzle falls into place with the revelation about Estella's parentage, linking her to Magwitch and Jaggers' dark legal past.
Pip makes an astonishing deduction, confirmed by Jaggers' clerk Wemmick. He realizes that Molly, Jaggers' strong-handed housekeeper, is Estella's mother.
How?
Jaggers had acquitted Molly of murder 20 years ago. Magwitch confirms his wife was a wild woman arrested for murder who threatened to kill their infant daughter. Pip puts the pieces together. Magwitch is Estella's father.
And Jaggers confirms it.
Jaggers reveals that Molly, before the trial, gave the baby girl to him, and he put her into the care of a lady from high society, Miss Havisham. The crushing irony is complete. The convict created a gentleman, and the criminal's daughter was placed in the upper class, destined to torment gentlemen.
With the complex web of crimes and identities untangled, the story races toward its disastrous climax. But not before one final act of vengeance is attempted against Pip.
Pip gets an anonymous note directing him to the isolated lime kiln. It's an ambush set by Orlick, Joe's disgruntled former employee, now Miss Havisham's porter. Orlick confesses to striking Mrs. Joe with the filed leg iron and intends to kill Pip.
Luckily, Herbert and Startup save him.
They find the note and arrive just in time. They rush back to London to prepare for the escape on the Thames.
The escape itself, meant to provide Magwitch safety, ends in disaster and death.
They attempt to board the Hamburg steamer via a rowing boat, but are intercepted. Magwitch attacks one of the occupants, who is revealed to be Compayson, intent on betrayal. Both men fall into the water. Compayson drowns. Magwitch is severely injured and captured.
The final moments Magwitch spends with Pip show the true depth of Pip's transformation.
Magwitch is condemned to death. His fortune seized by the crown, officially ending Pip's great expectations. But Pip's youthful disgust has finally turned into genuine love and pity. He vows never to leave Magwitch nursing him in the prison infirmary.
And he tells him the truth about his daughter.
Just before Magwitch dies peacefully, kissing Pip's hand, Pip whispers, "Dear Magwitch, can you hear me? Your daughter, whom you once loved and believed dead, is alive. She is beautiful and I love her."
Pip, now morally redeemed but physically and financially broken, finds salvation and reconciliation with Joe.
Pip falls desperately ill with fever. Joe returns to London, nurses him back to health, and quietly pays off his considerable debt. Once Pip is recovered, Joe departs, leaving a humble letter that finally makes Pip realize the immense, simple decency he once despised.
He tries to return to the only honest life he ever knew, but finds he is too late.
He resolves to return to Joe and Biddy, and asks Biddy to marry him. But when he arrives, he finds they have just married. Pip, accepting his fate, leaves for Cairo to work, eventually becoming a partner.
And the novel ends with that famous, slightly artificial happy ending, or rather, a hopeful companionship.
After 11 years, Pip returns. He encounters Estella at the site of Miss Havisham's demolished home. She's now a widow. Drummle died in a riding accident and is chastened by life. In the revised ending, they part as friends, with Pip taking her hand and together leaving the old place behind us without anything ever being able to separate us again.
That was an incredibly detailed and complex journey. It truly connects Dickens' early shame directly to Pip's eventual arrogance.
It does. Great Expectations functions as a perfect mechanism, moving us from Pip's initial guilt in the graveyard through his arrogant snobbery in London, and finally through disaster and illness to his profound moral redemption on the deathbed of the man he once despised.
Let's quickly summarize the central statements of this deep dive into Dickens' life and work as our main takeaway.
The foundational takeaway is that Dickens' life story, his sudden plunge into poverty and shame, was the engine that fueled his fierce social critique. Great Expectations shows us that true nobility comes not from corrupt wealth, which Pip's expectations were, but from simple loyalty and self-knowledge qualities embodied by Joe and, unexpectedly, Magwitch.
So Pip's journey is one of rejecting snobbery and finding genuine affection.
Exactly. It illustrates the complex and often destructive relationship between class, crime, and identity that defined the Victorian age.
It's astounding how meticulously the secrets and crimes were interconnected, all stemming from that single, spontaneous moment of kindness.
Dickens brilliantly highlights the pervasive power of class and secrecy. Magwitch's entire ambition to create a gentleman out of gratitude was inherently doomed to fail, because the Victorian system is designed to judge based on superficial appearance. Compassion, the well-dressed villain, was always preferred over Magwitch, the man of substance.
The true enduring tragedy is that Pip and Estella were both instruments of external ambition and vengeance. Pip of Magwitch's pride, and Estella of Miss Havisham's bitterness.
And that realization leads us to our final provocative thought for you, our listener. We see how neither Pip nor Estella ever truly owned their destinies, while their great expectations were, in effect. They were merely acting out someone else's fractured, decades-old fantasy.
Whether it was Magwitch's dream or Miss Havisham's vendetta.
Right. And this raises an important question that remains strikingly relevant today. Do our own great expectations, whether they are dreams for ourselves or ambitions we place upon those we raise, ever truly belong to us? Or are we often simply serving someone else's broken dream? Mull over that until our next deep dive.